hopefully your eyeballs don't sting too much from the color.
Thank you, Liam. It was incredible.
Thanks.
I hope you guys can all agree.
Thanks.
It was really amazing, and thank you for including the parts from the Great Endeavor. I know the film is not yet officially released. I think the release is coming later this year, correct?
Yeah, I mean, like with all our projects, like I mean, it's an artwork, but at the same time, it's Great Endeavor, particularly as a documentary, a docu-fiction, really that's coming out on streaming platforms. Well, whenever I finish it, really, but hopefully the end of the year. Yeah.
Congratulations. That is a huge success, and I know it was well received in Venice. So I mean, really, what an incredible work. You bring up so many questions, I mean, and challenges that we face as humanity. I mean, from world building to climate change. What are your, I mean, most concerning parts of this presentation? I mean, what do you want us to take with us today and carry and try to solve?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, you probably have an overwhelming sense of doom after the last 30 minutes. That's one of the things that you might take with you. But at the same time, like a work like Planet City, as a science fiction project, the imaginary world is constructed entirely from technology that's actually already here, right? Like, we haven't invented some fancy new gun or nuclear fusion or flying cars. It's all built and is a literal working model of a city that sustains 10 billion people in a way that relieves the pressure on the planet using only existing sustainable tech and green tech. And what that means is that climate change is no longer a technological problem, right? Like if we take away anything, it's this idea that climate change is now a crisis of the imagination and a crisis of culture and politics, not a crisis of technology. We're not sitting around waiting for some billionaire to figure it out or to create some magic bullet. We have everything we need. We've probably had everything we needed for 15 years. And we're still doing nothing about it, so that's desperately disappointing. But at the same time, it's also a really exciting position to be in, because if we wanted to, we could solve these problems tomorrow, right? So that's also extremely hopeful, I think.
Absolutely, and I think you positioning it like that gives us all hope. I think just the way the work is presented is incredibly powerful. Well, in my introduction, I forgot to mention that, of course, you're leading an important job here in SciArc. I mean, as leading the program on fiction and entertainment. And let's talk a little bit about world building, because that's your main medium. And as an artist, that's what you do. And I mean, I think it's really unparalleled expertise. And I mean, you know, there's not that many artists that work in this type of way with the world. So tell us a little bit more about that and the challenges and what kind of, you know, future you see in that particular take on art.
Yeah, I mean, as an artist, like, you know, some paint, some make sculptures, or, you know, walls of glowing pixels swimming around. We build imaginary worlds, I guess, and we output them as films or as costumes or props and objects that get acquired in the traditional means of the art world. But at the same time, we build worlds for film and television and the entertainment industry. We also do kind of world building consulting for brands like, you know, Mitsubishi, BMW, Nike, Ford, that are trying to like imagine what the future might look like in the context of how they might reposition themselves or reimagine what they do. And world building as a practice, I think, is super relevant right now, especially in the entertainment industry. Like, everything is a world, right? Like, we used to make shows. Now we make worlds that can be a show, but can also be a prequel or a sequel or a game or a metaverse or a comic book. And everyone wants a world, not just a singular story. But equally, and I think part of why I come to world building with my training in architecture and urbanism is that we now live in a world where it's inaccurate to describe Los Angeles, for example, as a single point on a map, right? To really understand LA, you need to understand all of the landscapes distributed around the world that are fundamental in constructing it and producing it, and producing our experiences of it. And that's what I tried to do in the narration of today's planetary city, is to say that, like, to understand a moment in time in a building like this, you need to think about, you know, where the clothes we are wearing comes from, the batteries that power our phones, and so on. And what it means is to really design for this world, you can't just design a singular object. Like, you know, product design and landscape design and planetary design have collapsed together into one thing, and the only way to do it is to imagine the entirety of the world. For me, world building is a way of thinking about design that includes the networks and the interconnected systems that bound us all and everything we own together. So I think world building as a medium is really the medium of our generation in many ways.
Incredible. I know you have a few exhibitions now on tour. One is coming from Madrid, I believe, through Mexico City, and it's going next to...
Back to Spain in Bilbao.
Back to Spain.
Yeah.
Amazing. So when the exhibition comes, and maybe some of us will be able to see them, I'm hoping certainly to see one. So it's a part film, and then you include costumes and objects from the films.
Yeah, like the show that's it's currently in Lima and then goes to Mexico and then back to Bilbao. It's 6 imaginary worlds, so like where the city, and we saw, I tried to include most of those in the film tonight, and then in Australia in August we have a solo show opening, which is 2 worlds. It's Planet City and the Great Endeavor, but you know, I try and think of the work as being both filmic, so there's, you know, mega scale projections that you can kind of immerse yourselves in, but you know, I'm also trained as a designer, so the props, objects, artifacts that are rescued from these sci-fi worlds also get exhibited as objects as well. So we try and explode the world of the film into the museum at the same time. So yeah, if you can catch it in any of these circuits, then yeah, you'll see some of that cool stuff. Yeah.
Great. Also, I wanted to talk for a second about the importance of Los Angeles. You briefly touched on that. I think in this room we have so many interesting people tonight, you know, and we all are here coming from different places on the planet. Talk about your perception and importance of LA as an art hub. I'm curious to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you would have a better perspective on that than I do. I'm relatively new to LA, and I didn't come here for the art world. I probably ran away from the European art world to get here and fiddle around in entertainment, to be honest. But I don't know, I'm here because so often in Europe, the mediums in which an artist might operate are extraordinarily small. Like you know, there's amazing work being produced, but it's being talked about and experienced inside very tiny niche echo chambers, you know. And what I love about this city is that it's a city of popular culture, and it's a city where the work is more accessible and it connects to a much broader range of audiences than the fancy folks that turn up at the Venice Biennale opening or just at Art Basel. So that's why I moved to LA, essentially, was to try and reach a different scale of audience, you know. And that's also why, I mean, yes, I make, you know, my own personal work like we saw tonight, but I also work, you know, in the entertainment industry because I'm much more interested in the reach that these extraordinary vehicles of fiction have. You know, the great disappointment about being here is we pix it all away, making stupid shit that like is just about numbing our brains on a Friday night. But the potential is extraordinary. You know, where, you know, one of the films I showed here tonight was made for documentary in Athens, and you know, it did really well, and maybe whatever, like 30,000 people passed through. But then we remixed that installation film into a music video for Forest Swords that's now like, I don't know, like 10 million views on YouTube or something. Like, and most people don't give a fuck about the video when they watch it and they listen to the song, but some do, and certainly more people than turned up in Documenta. So like I'm interested in the ways that we can co-opt the mediums of popular culture with art. And LA is a city to do that, yeah. But maybe you can tell me more about Malibu Art Collectors Club and what you guys do, yeah.
Well, I agree, I think, with that point. I think LA is really a unique place. Today, I think for those of you guys who lived here all your life, sometimes it's hard to grasp that. I mean, that's what I came across as different perspective talking to people about Los Angeles, especially those who spent like last 20 or 30 years here. So it's kind of, you know, you start complaining about whatever. But what's really important, I think, the LA, at least for the art world today, is a place where there's so much freedom for creative expression. And in the last 10 years, the city became more and more important. So many people moved here, you know, whether it's from New York or from Europe, and for a reason, because the art world in New York, I mean, for example, became kind of very intolerant of any errors or mistakes. So LA is still very free and forgiving to experimentation, and I think you kind of add to that point. So, and for me, you know, living in Dubai at the time, when I started working in the art world, I was always observing, you know, LA, and it was so important. So I'm glad I'm here, and it's nice to contribute to the world from here. I think the heartbeat of the art world is here today. So I want you guys to all kind of take it in and process and enjoy that. And you know, we should be grateful. I think we live in a great city, all contributing to each other's work. Yeah, and Malibu Art Collectors Club, I mean, it's called that way because I live in Malibu. You know? I mean, it's a small community that is comprised mostly from artists. I think that's what's so unique about that. When I arrived in Malibu, I mean, I was choosing for a long time. It took me 7 trips, I think, where to start my life on the West Coast. But when I arrived there, I felt it was like a post-communist utopia. And I think we're, in a sense, like was very like nature, you know, in the sense that it was very liberating coming, you know, I'm Russian American, so don't hold it against me today. But I mean, I grew up with a lot of nature. So for me, it's interesting. I think we both share this kind of idealistic views in some extent, you know, that's part of the vision. So I carry it through in my work. I think the belief that things are made possible by us, I think you talk about that to a large extent in your work. And I think the conversation we make happen with each other bring us forward. And I think it's our responsibility how to view our work, how to get ahead and contribute to that vision of humanity. Whether it's through film or through art. I mean, film is art as well, of course, but in a different facets of this exploration. Before we turn to the question, one question I wanted to ask you, since you mentioned you consult the film industry here, what would be your dream project? I'm curious, like after seeing this, like what do you want to do next? What would be?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like I think like we're in a writers' room for an extraordinary sci-fi series that is now on hold because of the writers' strike. I'm sure half the people in this room are like, currently on strike. So just like the utopia at the moment, the dream project is starting the thing that we were on that got cancelled again. Let's hope it comes back. But that would be amazing, right? Like I still think that the power of sci-fi is incredible, and that's what we do, like to get in rooms with writers and directors and help them to really think through what these imaginary futures could look like. It's funny, I didn't work on Blade Runner 2049. Maybe there's people in the room that did, but like, I don't know, I love the original. I included some clips if you could see it in the color from the 1982 version, which was really amazing, right? But I see it, a lot of people look at that cityscape as some kind of failed vision of the future that didn't come to pass, right? But if you think about the time in which it was made, the 1980s, that's when, it was the birth of the personal electronics boom, right? Like everyone was rolling around with a Sony Walkman, and they were recording stuff at home on VHS players for the first time. Everything cool was made in Japan, so all of the sci-fi at the time projected this kind of cyberpunk future that was a hybridization of Japan and America. And of course, like after the Japanese economic collapse, that future didn't come to pass. But all of the sci-fi of the time were this amazing chronicle of the fears and anxieties of America in the 80s, right? The great tragedy about contemporary sci-fi is we're still seeing visions of the future that look like that, as if the world hasn't moved on since the 80s, as we don't have the same fears and anxiety, as if we have the same fears and anxieties at that moment. We don't. Like if we were asked to do Blade Runner 2049, I think if you wanted to be true to the original vision, it wouldn't be about just continuing that world, but rather you would look at what the emerging superpowers of today look like, not the emerging superpowers of the 80s, and perhaps instead of a Japan-American hybrid, it would be like a Brazil-American hybrid or an India-American hybrid, right? Because that would be, today's sort of chronicle of the moment. So, the dream project would be to work on like a killer sci-fi that gave us the freedom to explore worlds that I think would be culturally relevant for today, not rehash old worlds that we've been doing since the 80s. Yeah. Let's see. I'm still getting told to make cyberpunk shit, so it's never going to happen, probably. But.
Okay, well, I think I'm out of my questions. So if you guys have some questions for Liam or for me.